I have served the Duke of Aldervane for 24 years, and in all that time I have witnessed two things that surprised me: the night his father died and left him the title at 19, and the evening Mrs. Oldvos walked into the private card room at the Aldervane Winter Assembly and collided with my employer in the dark. The first was a tragedy. The second was, by the narrowest of margins, the better thing. Let me set the scene as I understood it from both sides, having had the full account from each, separately, and in very different tones. The assembly had been my lord's idea, which surprised everyone, because in 3 consecutive seasons he had refused every invitation, every dinner arrangement, and every carefully engineered introduction the county's hostesses had attempted on his behalf. The Duke of Aldervane was not, by any measure, a man who enjoyed being managed. He was exacting, precise, and feared in the way that very quiet men are feared, not for noise, but for the particular silence that preceded a correction. He had refused the daughter of an earl, the granddaughter of a baronet, and a young woman so universally admired that her rejection by Lord Aldervane was spoken of in 3 parishes as a minor local catastrophe. He had refused them all with perfect manners and no explanation. And yet he had agreed to host the Winter Assembly. I had my theory, which I kept to myself. He had agreed because he intended to spend the evening in the card room upstairs, which was private, which was quiet, and which had a decent fire and 3 unopened volumes he had been meaning to read since October. He would put in the required appearance below, exchange the necessary pleasantries, and retreat. No one could fault him for absenting himself from his own assembly in his own house. He had not counted on Mrs. Aldecott. Mrs. Aldecott was the matchmaking aunt of Miss Voss, a woman of tremendous organizational energy and very little restraint. She had brought her niece to the assembly as a working companion. Miss Voss carried the correspondence, managed the introductions, and kept Mrs. Aldecott's portfolio of eligible candidates in order. The niece herself, by all accounts, was entirely invisible. This was, I later learned, entirely intentional. Miss Voss had discovered, over 3 seasons of this work, that invisibility was the safest and most efficient state for a woman paid to think rather than to be admired. She wore gray. She carried a leather portfolio. She did not dance. The trouble began at 9:30, when Mrs. Aldecott discovered that she had left a critical document, a letter of introduction for a Miss Haverford, the evening's principal candidate for the Duke's notice, in the portfolio she had set down in the card room upstairs, before the guests arrived. She could not go herself. She was in the middle of steering Miss Haverford toward the south window, where the candlelight was flattering. She sent Isolde. Isolde, who had attended 3 Aldervane events without ever entering the house above the ground floor, found the back staircase without difficulty. She had a good sense of space and a better sense of direction. She located the card room, noted that the fire was very much lit, assumed a footman had simply neglected to bank it, and stepped inside. The room was dark except for the fire. She moved toward the writing table by the window, where the portfolio would logically have been left. She did not see the armchair. She did not see the men in the armchair. She did, however, collide with the small table beside it, which sent a glass of brandy across the hearthrug and woke the men in the armchair from what I sincerely hope was a light doze, and not the deeper rest he had been intending. What followed, from both accounts, was a brief exchange of startled sounds, nothing as undignified as a shout, on either side, which I credit to their respective characters, and then the door opened, because the sound of breaking glass carries, and Mrs. Holt the housekeeper arrived with 2 footmen and 3 candles. The light was, under the circumstances, poorly timed. There are certain households in England where tradition runs deeper than statute, and Aldervane Hall is among them. It has been understood in this house, since before my time and my predecessor's time, that a man and a woman found alone together in the private rooms of Aldervane Hall are, by the household's reckoning, as good as engaged. It is not law. It is not written anywhere I have found. But Mrs. Holt knew it, the footmen knew it, and by morning the kitchen knew it, which meant by morning everyone knew it. My lord knew it, standing in the firelight with a damp hearthrug and a book open on the arm of his chair. Miss Voss did not know it. Not yet. She retrieved the portfolio with perfect composure, apologized to Mrs. Holt for the glass, and went back downstairs to find Mrs. Aldecott. She was so entirely unrattled by the encounter, or appeared to be, that Mrs. Aldecott, who had been watching for her, noticed nothing except the return of the letter of introduction. My lord appeared below for exactly 11 minutes, spoke to 6 people, declined the introduction to Miss Haverford with every courtesy, and retired. I brought him his evening tea and found him reading. He had not reopened the brandy. He did not look, to my eye, like a man who had been surprised. He looked like a man who had resolved something. "Aldous," he said, without looking up, "who is the woman my aunt employs as a companion?" "Mrs. Aldercott's niece, my lord." "Miss Voss." "A clergyman's daughter." He turned a page. "She did not apologize to me." "No, my lord." "Only to Mrs. Holt." "For the glass." "The glass was her responsibility, my lord." "The glass was on the table she struck." He looked up at that. Then he looked back at his book. "Yes," he said. "Quite right. I left him to it." Miss Voss arrived the following morning at 10 o'clock. She had sent no card ahead. She arrived, I was told by the doorman, in a plain gray coat and with the particular expression of a person who has decided something and intends to carry it through before they have time to reconsider. I showed her to the morning drawing room myself. My lord was already there. He had been there since 8, which was unusual, and he had not asked for a second coffee, which was more unusual still. She sat down without being invited to sit, which I noted as a promising sign. My lord noted it too, though his expression gave nothing away. "Your Grace," she said, "I understand that there is a tradition in this household. I was not aware of it last evening. I want to state plainly that I entered that room on an errand, that the collision was entirely accidental, and that I have no intention of holding you to any understood obligation arising from it. I release you from it, fully and without condition. I would ask only that you extend the same courtesy to me, so that I may continue my aunt's employment without difficulty." She had prepared the speech. I could tell. It had the shape of something rehearsed, not over-rehearsed, not mechanical, but considered. She was, underneath the composure, not entirely certain of her ground. My lord let her finish. He had the patience of a man who has learned that interrupting a well-constructed argument is both rude and inefficient. He waited until she was done, and the room was quiet except for the fire. Then he said, "That is a thorough argument." "Thank you," she said, cautiously. "I have a response." She waited. "No," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "No. I have no intention," he said, and his voice was entirely level, entirely precise, and carrying something underneath it that I had not heard in 24 years, of being released. Miss Voss was quiet. The fire shifted. Outside, the winter light was cold and very clear. "You don't know me," she said. "No," he agreed. "I know that you entered a dark room on someone else's errand and did not apologize to the men you startled, because you correctly identified that the glass was your responsibility and the man was not. I know that you gave a composed account of the evening's events to your aunt without alarming her. I know that you arrived this morning without a card, because you did not want a card to give me warning to prepare a different answer." He paused. "I find that I know a reasonable amount. Those are not the foundations of," she stopped herself, "of anything reasonable. They are the foundations," he said, "of considerable interest. Which is more than I have had in 3 seasons." She looked at him very steadily. This, I think, was the moment, not the collision, not the candles, but this, the steadiness of her gaze and the fact that she did not look away, and did not soften the question in it. "You are quite serious," she said. "I am always quite serious," he said. "It is, I am told, a significant personal flaw. You are welcome to add it to your account." Something shifted in her face then. Not warmth, not yet, but the first thread of it, the kind that comes when a person recognizes another person's particular quality and finds it unexpectedly familiar. She had, it seemed to me watching from the doorway I had no legitimate reason to be standing in, been serious herself for a very long time, and in rooms where it had cost her something. "I would need to think," she said. "Of course," he said. "And I would need," she paused, gathering it. "I would need you to understand that I am not a candidate. I have spent 3 seasons managing candidates. I am not a prospect. I am not a portfolio entry. If you are under the impression that any of this is ordinary." "Miss Voss," he said. "I hid in my own card room to avoid the ordinary. I have some sense of the difference." She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, with great precision, "You still broke the brandy glass." "The table broke the brandy glass," he said, and there was something in his voice I had genuinely not heard before, something careful and warm and faintly rueful. "And the table is not the one I am asking to call on Thursday." She stood. She smoothed her gray coat. She picked up her gloves from the arm of the chair. "Thursday," she said, and it was not a question and not quite an agreement, but it was something in between that a man with any sense at all would take as permission, and my lord had, in all the years I had known him, a great deal of sense. He rose when she rose. He walked with her to the hall. He did not offer his hand, that was not what the moment called for, but he opened the front door himself, which Mrs. Holt noticed and which I noticed and which was, in Aldervane Hall, not a small thing. He came back to the drawing-room and picked up his coffee, which had gone cold. He did not, for once, call for a fresh cup. He stood by the window and looked out at the winter drive, and I thought, not for the last time, and not wrongly, that the brandy glass, and the dark card-room, and the portfolio her aunt had left behind, and the particular efficient courage of a woman who apologized to the housekeeper and not to the Duke, had between them accomplished more than 3 seasons of careful arrangement had managed. She came on Thursday. She came the Thursday after. They married in February at St. Aldrich's, in the same church where her father had served for 30 years, and my lord stood at the front of it and waited with the expression of a man who has, for once, not the slightest objection to being found.